Gather round, dads, it's time for a tale. Hand me a book and a warm pint of ale. Let's discuss writing and the literary gods with Dan Roberts on the Dadlit Pod.
Welcome to the Dadlit Pod, the literary podcast that knows Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap, and called it macaroni. My guest today, Mallory, will know something about that because, of course, he is from England. He is also an author who does sci-fi, lit RPG, and progression fantasy. He's the winner of the 2026 Jim Bain Memorial Short Story Award. He's also a PhD candidate who researches men's reading habits and an author who writes the books that research keeps telling him are missing. Mallory, welcome to the Deathlit Pod.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Yes, I was told countless times you have to get Mallory, get Mallory. And I was like, Mallory? But I've been following your thoughts and your research and your comments.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you want to fill in the dad literati on what you're working on and what it says about male reading habits and about how they affect their kids.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks very much for having me on. I think this is something that people probably need to think a little bit more about and how it affects
Yes.
really the generation we're bringing up at the moment. So I've been looking at what's happened to men's reading, really, because if we go back about 120 years, reading was a really masculine thing to do, and we see it with famous researchers, famous authors, famous politicians, all the sort of people that we would see as being role models of how we would want people to behave. We're huge readers, and we see it in our fiction as well, where in Lord of the Rings, the main characters are all people that are very literate and they read and they write poetry and they sing us. And it's about 100 years ago, we suddenly have this movement towards fiction no longer being an acceptable thing for men to do.
Mhm.
And we see Henry James, his parents get very concerned that he's somebody that is reading too many books, and they send him specifically to a school where they will dissuade him away from fiction and to do more important things. And that really starts to lock into a sort of a cultural view of particularly novels and fiction being something that is not masculine and is silly and is something that should be treated with suspicion. And that increasingly locks in over that 100 years. And we see it even in the way that fiction is marketed. It moves away from being something that the family does, or that we see a lot in the way that Dickens is consumed, where the man of the house would read those stories out to the rest of his family, and it would be a wider thing that was led by the role model of the male, and increasingly becomes targeted specifically at women. And we see libraries and the focus of what publishers are looking to pick up is things that are going to be more concerned with the things that women would be looking to purchase. And that goes on and goes on and goes on. And if you look, we've just had the latest figures on reading in the UK come out just last month, and we see this huge drop again, year after year after year, as to boys' enjoyment of reading, which is now down to the mid 20%, which is an astonishingly low level to be at of a skill that we know makes such a difference. We know that the ability with language and the capacity to deal with words is a complete link to how successful you're going to be in later life. And the fact that we're now down to this incredibly low, the lowest we've seen of boys reading, is particularly in the UK, but you have a very similar thing in the US, is is something that we have to look to do something about.
Yeah. It's funny, and you bring up the reading alone concept, because throughout history there have been varying views of reading alone. And it's very funny because I took a history of sexuality course, and during the 18th century, so the Enlightenment period, the idea that a woman would sit by herself and read alone a work of fiction was perceived as a form of self-love or onanism or
Yeah,
masturbation.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And, and the the concept was, as you said, it was books were very precious. They were very important.
Yeah,
Fathers
yeah,
read books to their families and instilled in the family a sort of centrality and masculine virtue
yeah,
of being a well-read person.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even that phrase was such an important one. Well read. We
Hmm.
use it's a shorthand, isn't it, for being everything you are supposed to be, really.
Yeah.
And the fact that that has vanished now from cultural reference, really, and it's now being realistically at the point where to be a man who reads, I mean, we see this really troubling research about how boys in particular view readers. And the idea that in that to have a character in a in a work who is a reader automatically creates views in the younger readers of somebody that is weak, is soft, is in somehow not masculine, is a real shift in that viewpoint. There was some research done in Australia, and they were asked, well, how what would be the problem if somebody viewed you as a reader? And they said, oh, well, we wouldn't want that because it would damage our social worth with our peers. And we see that across so many countries now where to be a reader is a feminine act, and to be a man that reads is to need to do it in secret or pay a social cost.
Yeah, the this has come up a lot because from my personal background, because I come from a Jewish family
Yeah,
where particularly over the history of Jewish people, male reading is central.
yeah,
The idea of male reading, I mean, the thing one aspired to
yeah,
within, the shtetl was to have enough money and that you didn't have to do anything but read and study.
yeah,
And so fundamentally, and I think this is translated, particularly in the 20th century, with it's a joke that um, women who like well-read men, tend to end up with Jews in America because they're always reading and commenting on their reading. But
yeah,
it figures into the ritual of daily existence. Reading does in Jewish households. So to me, reading was always considered a masculine pursuit,
yeah.
particularly the reading of history and fact-based sort of books. The kind of pursuit of truth and understanding, or um, you know, there's always a biography of Winston Churchill to be read,
Yeah.
and it intrigues me that this was not the case in all households. And it's interesting that it's happening both on your side of the Atlantic and on our side of the Atlantic.
And it is an entirely worldwide phenomenon. We do not see any areas in any of the data that we have where reading is improving.
Mhm.
It is a continual drop down, and the drop down with the gap between male and female reading is astonishingly poor if you're a guy. And I think we sometimes I think particularly those of us that read and write, and most of our friends are often involved in that as well. I
Yeah.
don't think we realise how absolutely terrible it is, because often when I talk to people about this, they go, "Well, I've got loads of books at home," or "Well, I read to my kids." It's like, well, yes, but there's a reason that we're friends, and there's a reason that we know each other, and that we've come across each other, and
Yeah.
that is not the norm. And people, I think, would be astonished to realise how few books there really are in the world, really, and how few books a child actually has access to now. And it's survivor bias, isn't it? That we've read,
Oh
therefore
yeah.
we've reached a situation in life where we have friends that read, but that isn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's the part that I've realized and that I've noticed is that uh there is a subset of people who tend to find each other who are readers, who discuss reading, who analyze the books they read, et cetera, to each other. And that becomes part of their social framework. And to that extent, that's not happening everywhere, as the data, as you said, has shown. Um, and so I've been doing my own personal experiment here at the house, which is that my wife reads her lady, vampire books just for fun. She has a PhD in public health. She needs a break. And I'm always reading, of course, for the podcast, and I'm always writing because I write novels.
Yeah,
And to that extent, to be seen doing that,
yeah,
right? To be seen reading and writing. I have a 5 year old in the house
yeah,
who my entire house is now filled with notes, phonetically spelled notes, hundreds of them. They're everywhere. That's the game she likes to play. She likes reading books.
yeah.
It's what mommy and daddy are doing. She wants to participate. She wants to hear what's being read, and she wants to work on her reading. And from I'd never before I became, interested in this question of childhood literacy and this question of male reading, it never occurred to me that making a point of creating a reading culture in your home
Yeah.
is what is actually going to do it. It doesn't necessarily matter what you read,
No.
but a reading culture in the home will create readers. It has to,
Yeah.
because the sort of mimetic response from the young people to both of their parents reading, the presumption is that's what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah.
And I think that's where I think a lot of us have got things wrong, really, because you make the key point, which is it doesn't actually matter what you read.
Yeah.
All research into into child's literacy is access to words begets access to words. So
Yes.
we often, and one of the key things that we see schools do a lot with boys is the things that they're enjoying reading often aren't necessarily the things schools think they should be reading. So
Yes.
there comes to be this push of shame to, no, no, but that's rubbish. Don't read that. You should be
Yeah.
reading this. And that trigger and that push away from the thing they're enjoying is for me, and I think so much of the research backs up that moment where they switch off from is when they're
Hmm.
told, well, no, what you're reading is it isn't good enough. Whereas actually, if we can just get back to a stage where, well, if you're enjoying it and you're reading it, have more of it, have as much
Hmm.
of it as that you want to have, because that skill of reading and having access to the words will mean at some stage you probably will move on to other things. But
Yeah.
switching off because you've been told that's not very good, or that's silly, or that's trash. It's why I'm a huge fan of Rack Press and their push towards more pulp fiction. Really, this idea
Hmm.
of there being this sort of disreputable form of writing that, particularly across history, we know men have enjoyed the sci-fi and the detective fiction and the silly things that are often looked down upon. That's actually the sort of books that we know will get people interested in reading.
Yeah. I mean, you could point to all sorts of top level uh, figures in the 20th century who read pulp fiction,
Yes.
including Dwight Eisenhower,
Yeah.
who was obsessed with westerns and just
Yeah.
read westerns all the time.
And there's something, and again, Western is often something that is spoken about almost like with a smirk when people talk about that.
Mhm.
It's just a Western. But actually, if you look at the dynamics at play in the way that the characters work, in the way that the good versus evil against the sort of drive of the protagonist within them, they're actually really healthy things for a developing mind to get their head
Yes.
around because it's a nice, straightforward. Whereas, I mean, my lad's 9. And I look at some of the books that are often being aimed at his age group, and they're not only are they fairly inappropriate in terms of some of the content that they're dealing with that I can't believe 9-year-olds should be concerned about, but there's a huge amount of moral grayness in the characters and this
Mhm.
huge weight of trauma that surrounds everybody. And yes, there is a place for that sort of fiction, but I'm not necessarily sure that it's what 9, 10, 11-year-olds should be getting as an almost exclusive diet of what they should be reading. Whereas
Yeah.
often when you read pulp, you have very black and white, good versus evil. The goodies are going to win. And actually that's a pretty decent message to try to
Mhm.
get across to children is rather than, well, trauma is terrible and things are going to be bad and we're going to lose lots of people, and we're not really sure who's the goodie and the baddie. I think that's a complexity that isn't healthy really for young readers and young minds to get themselves obsessed with.
Yeah, I mean, well, give me an example of some books because obviously on our side, what we're experiencing is this just catastrophe that's combined the combination of whole language learning and
Yeah,
the institution of whole language learning in American schools, which has been a horrible catastrophe
yeah,
and it has affected at least one of my nephews. Is always searching for cueing words
yeah.
instead of
Actually knowing how
doing
to read.
phonics,
Yeah, yeah,
instead of actually knowing how to
yeah,
read. And on the other side, there's, well, we don't read the whole book, we just
yeah.
read
Extracts.
extracts. And so, what is going on your side of the pond with how that works? Like, what is a book that's been sent home or that gets sent home
I mean,
with a 9-year-old British schoolboy?
you pick up on the phonics issue. It's a huge battleground in the UK between, and because we have an academy system here whereby we used to have a national curriculum whereby everybody had
Hmm.
to do the same things. We've now got an academy system whereas individual academies can sort of choose their own particular approach. And you have some
Hmm.
academies that go absolutely all into phonics, which, works and has like body of research behind it and, you know, it's effective. And then you have what almost feels like a vibes approach, which, as you say, that whole language learning, where as long as they can take a decent punt at what the word means, that'll be all right.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a massive split that we see across. And it almost depends on your postcode, which school you go
Yeah.
to in the UK is the one that you are assigned to. And if you're assigned to one where they don't have phonics, well, I'm sorry that's where your position is. But we we have a bit of an issue, I think, with what's called, like, I think you have a similar idea of young adult fiction, which
Yeah.
is now certainly in my head, young adult fiction is Enid Blyton and
Hmm.
Famous Five, whereas now it seems to be things that you would normally have thought would have an 18 reference if it was made into a film, and that seems to be dropping down very, very quickly into that sort of age group where a 9, 10-year-old will get those sort of books sent home. Where, as I say, you have content which feels like they're not really emotionally equipped for or to
Hmm.
understand yet. But extracts is a killer, isn't it? It's just the belief that people can't read an entire book, therefore you have to just pick 6 or 7 bits out of it and go, yes, we've done Hamlet now. Like, well, no, you've don't tell people they've done Hamlet when they've read 6 little modern extracts of something and you've said that that's done now. But there has been this idea, I think, that we have to go for the accessibility and everything has to be accessible to the most challenged learner, really. And there was a story not that long ago where a parent was effectively, it was in our national press, where a parent was being told off by school really because they were reading to their child at night, and it was giving the child too much of an advantage that they were being getting access to words. And you read something, you hope it's parody really, and then you look at it and go, it really isn't. This is a
Yes.
school that really was saying it's not fair. That you are advantaging your child by reading to them, and you sometimes wonder
I
what you're doing.
that has actually happened here. There was a story, and uh, there was an editorial which suggested that parental reading and parental involvement with their children was actually creating an iniquity
Yeah,
that um, would not help other kids, so they should just not be.
yeah,
And you hear that and you're like, well, that person's insane
yeah,
because because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that sort of you'd want a student not to have the full breadth of parental involvement and the full breadth of parental concern. And not surprisingly, what we're dealing with in the United States is homeschooling. There are
yeah,
people, I was just at a Fourth of July party yesterday where a woman whose mother was a public school teacher is now planning to homeschool her child.
yeah,
And it points to lack of faith in the public school system. It points to concerns about violence and lack of discipline. It points to a real concern about values and
yeah,
questions of values. And particularly with COVID-19, the kids came home, the parents were home with them, the
yeah,
parents were listening to what was being taught, and it caused this. I can only describe it as a sort of spasm of realization, like a shark that detects blood in the water, where parents said, "This is insane.
yeah,
What is going on here?" And in the United States, I bring this up a lot when I talk to people about politics, particularly during the COVID era. Uh, for most Americans, the point at which they interact with the United States government, the state and local governments, is at the school level.
yeah,
That is where they pay their taxes. They never see a police officer. They go through most of their life without ever getting a break in or their house ever
yeah,
burning down or running for office or anything like that, or even having to go before the their town council, which
yeah,
is both good and bad, I think, because the civics education's fallen off too.
yeah,
But the second you start fucking with the schools,
yeah,
now you're in deep trouble. And I think most parents didn't realize that their school boards were really only concerned with the distribution of money. That's mostly, and that everything below that is dominated by principals and the teachers themselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that idea that I think we were quite proud of having the concept of a national curriculum, which meant that no matter where
Hmm.
you went to school, no matter what teacher was in front of you, every year seven child would have the same access to the same education. And I
Yeah.
think the fact that that has broken apart so much, really in only the last 20 years in the UK, has led to even more inequality than I think we ever had
Oh
before
yeah,
we
yeah.
had a national. Because now I had a friend who was a head teacher, and he said it actually feels a little bit now like you're the warlord in a failed state. That the
Hmm.
idea is that you just drag as many resources to you as you can, and you lock your gates, and then you look after the ones you've got inside your little
Hmm.
fiefdom, and that's the best that you can hope to do. And I think that's a terrible way to suddenly look at education, but it does that. You can see it, and you can see education shouldn't depend on the excellence of the adult at the front of the room. There should be something that underpins a wider cultural understanding of what education is. And I think when
And
you rely,
expectations,
yes,
and expectations, yeah.
and I think once it is the domain of what adult you have, that's terrifying because you could
Hmm.
get lucky and you could have an amazing teacher who inspires and so many teachers do. But on the other hand, you can have somebody that has an agenda and has a view on the sort of education they wish to push across. And you get a totally different experience, and that can't be right because the child isn't choosing who they're in front of just because they happen to be that age and from that particular postcode.
Hmm.
And I get frustrated because we know reading opens every single door that there is. The more words that you have, and it's not just to do with academic success, the more language you have, the more able you are to look after yourself, the better you can to explain what's occurring to you and to sort of deal with, as you say, the governments and to deal with people that you're going to have to work through life in order to succeed. And if you don't have the ability to read and if you don't have a capacity with language, you're going to struggle. And we seem to be baking in that some people are just going to struggle because of the experiences that they have.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it just contributes to the iniquity itself. By having low expectations for certain people, what you're effectively doing is saying, oh, well, they just, we're just going to do it at their own speed and reward them for coming in. And the problem is that there's going to be a person at home with other kids who's like, I want your grades to be good. I want you reading this book. I'll get you extra help. We're going to pay for the testing prep, all that other stuff. And you just end up having greater iniquity in that regard as certain people get access to better education. Yeah.
And we know the lowest of expectations are particularly for boys. We know
Yes.
that in the education sphere that we see it in educational outcomes. I mean, the difference between female success and male success in any sort of testing program now is just considering where we've come from. We talked about 100 years ago before, and you go, well, it's not that long that we've had universal teaching
Yeah.
for boys and girls. So the idea that girls are now outstripping male performance to such an extent is insane. But that notion that, well, boys can be good at other things and that actually it's more important they're good at science than it is to read. Well, actually, they're only going to get good at science if they've got the language skills in order to be able to do the engineering and the science and the more important things that people think that we should be pushing boys towards. We often
Yeah.
even see it in what the books we recommend. We have a real focus on boys should read non-fiction because that's what will interest them. But we know that fiction unlocks things that non-fiction doesn't. So if you're only pushing boys towards non-fiction because you think that's what boys should be interested in, then we're not going to get that same access to the empathetic and the subtler skills that we know make things so much easier for you when you can actually do them.
Yeah. So what is I know that you're continuing to do research because you're working on this. I've heard all sorts of suggestions for how to create a culture where male reading is engaging and desirable for boys. And I think you wrote an article where you mentioned something that I had previously said, which is I think that um, mainstream literary fiction authors should write Warhammer 40K
Yeah.
tie-in stories. And I think they should do it to fanfare and that it should be celebrated within Warhammer 40K uh, as a way to almost introduce people to the author. That oh, I really like this story that so and so wrote about Space Marines, that let's let's use an example. The pirate himself, Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie
Yeah,
wrote
I'll
this
go read the
story.
satanic verses now. That'll
Yeah,
be
yeah,
fine.
yeah. Now I'm gonna go, oh, Salman Rushdie only has one eye? Why does he only have one eye? He was married to Padma Lakshmi? That woman's gorgeous. And he looks like a troll. How did that happen? And then all of a sudden, reading's a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to that extent, it's like creating that or breaking down that barrier. And I'm sure you tell me about your work with Lit RPG because that's another avenue of doing this. I think that ultimately I love the idea of like sort of giving an famous author who writes literary fiction a chance to engage with something that's sort of fun and weird as a way to almost create a stool of understanding. You know what I mean?
I think, from my view, I think that's exactly why what I think Lit RPG is doing now. I think
Yeah.
that's my view is that we have got a generation, maybe two generations of males who've been sort of told that the things they like doing aren't acceptable, really. That
Yes.
gaming isn't something that you should be doing. It's a waste of time. It's pointless, and they enjoy doing it, and yet they've been told that it's a subculture. It's
Well,
something.
they've also been told that the way they do it is wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah,
every
yeah.
aspect about
Every
it, every
aspect of it.
aspect about it is wrong. Every aspect about that is it's either geeky and that has a social thing to it, or it's something that adults don't approve of, or it's something that's immature and they should grow out of it. All of
Yeah.
this stuff. It's gone on for two generations now. And I think what Lit RPG has taps into really is it takes the structure of the familiarity of the game. So it takes
Hmm.
something that quite a lot of male readers are very, very familiar with and are very comfortable with. But then rather than it just being the passivity of the game and the thing that they perform within, it moves
Hmm.
towards literary, and it moves it towards something that is read and something that can be enjoyed and then talked about with others as well. And I think it's the community aspect that exists around lit RPG, which is why it's being successful right now.
Hmm.
So for those of you, you might have listeners that aren't familiar with this, but it's an idea that really has only been around for 5 6 years, where you've got, certainly in the Anglo sphere, it was quite big in Korea and quite big in Russia, but in it really came about in the early 2020s, where writers were taking their experiences of things like Dungeons and Dragons, and rather than it being a campaign that you'd play, we're moving them into quite long books, on a site like Royal Road. And we've now got this huge growth of this genre really on Kindle Unlimited, where you've got effectively for a monthly subscription, you've got access to thousands upon thousands of works of lit RPG. And they're all very long because they're all around 100, words. They're all quite complicated because they've got all this maths and stats and complexity to them. And they're all largely available in audiobook as well. So you've got people that are having long journeys. So truckers are very, very on board with lit RPGs. They have these very long journeys, where 40-hour long books are exactly what you're looking for, really, where you can hit
Hmm.
an entire novel there. And I think the success that genre is having with a group of readers who are traditionally seen as not reading at all and not having any interest, or the even the capacity to concentrate for long enough to do a book, which is the extract thing that we talked about before, suddenly are reading books that run up to millions of words. And I think
Hmm.
there is a real moment right now where the emergence of that being something that it's okay to do is really important, where men can talk about the fact that, I mean, Dungeon Crawler Carl is the huge success at the moment, which is about to be made into a TV series. But that's gone from being a very subversive, reading it as a web serial free online to something that's gone through with no connection really with traditional publishing at all until he was already making hundreds of thousands of pounds from it. That's the only stage that traditional publishing got involved. And I think it's a really interesting model for how we get people that don't read back engaged.
Mm. Yeah, the I thought it's come up because it's peculiar to me, and I worry that so take the sort of um rigid strictures of the um the agenting world, for
Yeah,
example. This idea that there's only, an acceptable framework with which to understand the world that you can write a book from. It has to be, this sort of perception of, critical theory mixed with sort of straight up endless acceptance, all of these other things. To me, I think by creating that atmosphere, right? The sort of cool, fun, challenging, zeitgeisty characters that you used to have, like David Foster Wallace
yeah,
or even Salman Rushdie,
yeah,
or uh, Hollenbeck,
yeah,
these sort of zeitgeisty, challenging characters. Uh, in the insurgent framework gets kind of shut down because the book never makes it anywhere, right?
and it becomes that vicious cycle, doesn't it? It's
Yes,
we get into this notion that men don't read books, therefore
yeah,
books predominantly written for men's interests
yes,
tend to get squeezed away because at the end of the day, people want to make money. So if you think you're only going to make money from more or less dragon porn, that's where you're going to be looking to invest all of your time
yeah.
and energy, isn't it? And that you're absolutely right. I can't imagine Hollenbach getting if he was starting out today, I
Yes,
don't think his books would be getting anywhere near an agent, would they?
yes, if Holenbeck were a 27-year-old self-hating white guy from Connecticut, uh, and he were pitching, submission,
Yes. It's
it
not
would
going to go
never
anywhere.
happen. It would
Yeah.
never happen.
No.
This book that made it in the New York Times, that it's just not going to happen
Yeah.
for anyone who isn't already
Yeah.
Holenbeck. And so the element of sort of competition, of masculine argumentation, of quick-wittedness, of sort of the sort of male energy of male friendships and all these other things, they just don't make it
Yeah.
into contemporary writing,
Yeah.
uh, because that's not breaking through unless you're self-critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, which is a
But,
thing I've noticed. But-
but it is
so
it's such a challenge though, isn't it? Because it be one the one thing begets the other, doesn't it? It's
yeah,
because we say men don't read, we don't see books written for men because there isn't a big enough audience there, which
yes,
means then writers don't get to produce books that men might read, and again that's I think where I come back to this notion of writers that are able to, and the small presses really that have grown up around
hmm,
recognizing that this is a challenge. I think are having some success because, and I think we can have views on whether Amazon is a good thing or not, but it has
yeah,
democratized the access to books. And I
hmm,
think that it is now easier than it has ever been in order for somebody to get their words out there. But the challenge is how do you get your words out there to connect to an audience? And I think that's where, coming back to Lit RPG, the notion that a community is now formed around a very, very niche specific genre
hmm,
is is causing help. It's creating its own weight now, in a way that you think, if you look back to fantasy writing, which is what it's a tiny subsection of, that used to be incredibly mainstream. But I think it would be a challenge now to think, if you take Sanderson out, can you really name a big fantasy author that is producing works now that isn't? I'm thinking of Martin and
Yeah.
the idea that books have stopped coming now.
Yes.
But I think if you take Sanderson out of that, the idea of of massive fantasy names, which certainly, like when I was growing up, you would be able to name five, six, seven really huge fantasy authors. I'm not sure you
Mhm.
could now, because they haven't got the access to market that they traditionally would have done.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the this, like we've been talking about, points back to an underlying ecosystem question. And I've come around to this idea. I see a lot of the impediments to um to making this happen. And one of the primary ones is that publishers don't pay their editors and their acquisition editors enough. And so, particularly in the United States, high status, low paying jobs tend to be taken up by women,
Yeah,
particularly women from wealthy families or who have a husband who out earns them.
yeah,
And the pursuit then is not as, I would say, competitive. It's not as intensive. I think I forget who it was, but I love how she articulated it. She was on Kristen McTiernan's No Nonsense Kristen YouTube channel,
yeah,
and she was a woman author who had said back in the day, you sent your manuscript into some guy named Murray. And Murray didn't give a shit who you were or where you came from. If he liked your manuscript, he'd work with it and he'd make it happen.
yeah,
And the Murrays are all gone at this point. You know what I mean? They all retired.
yeah,
And so the economics of it, this is where Amazon comes in,
yeah,
because in democratizing the publishing process, there's questions about reliability of independent works. There are
absolutely.
questions about the costs associated, and now the main complaint that I hear from young male authors, and by young I mean under 50, because that's young in
Yeah,
this game at
yeah,
this point, is a question of access to investment.
yeah,
Right. That's ultimately what a big five publishing deal is. It's
yeah,
access to investment, access to editors, marketing,
yeah,
placement, and that sort of thing. And from that perspective, uh, small presses like Raconteur, where you were mentioning, where you do your work, I think are going to be incredibly important for male authors, particularly from the vision of Raconteur knows what it's putting out. They know
yeah,
what kind of books they're going to put out,
yeah,
and they know who their audience is going to be. And I think that what you're saying about Lit RPG is the same thing I'm trying to do with Dad Lit,
yeah,
which is to create an awareness that there is a group of people who should have always had, but now can't find the books that they want to read. Yeah.
yeah. And I think, because the longer that you go without finding it, the more you do something else.
Yes,
And I
yes.
think that's why I am particularly concerned with children's access to books, is that that's the moment where you either decide that you're a reader or you decide that you're not.
Mm, yeah.
And we've now got such a huge range of different things that if we go back 100 years, there wasn't a huge range of different things you could do. You could read a book or you
Yeah,
could,
you can read a book or do nothing. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Whereas now, and one of the articles I had in my Substack was my concern that if we don't give children and boys in particular the role models of reading that are there are other
Hmm.
models of success that exist around them and they can easily find online
Yep.
that are much, much less healthy for them. And I think the speed in which if you don't get a capacity with language, if you don't get that way to make academic success because you can't read that well, and then you've got
Hmm.
people online that are showing you ways that you can very quickly get access to fast cars and fast women and all the trappings of success, you enter a really fertile ground for the manosphere to have huge swathes of boys
Hmm.
seeing that that is the only way forward because they're cut off from what would have been a traditional way of making it a success of yourself. And
Yeah.
that's why it matters that we don't just say boys don't read, because if they start then doing other things, we're going to have even more so. And I think we're already seeing that now. I think we it has been a good 10, 15 years where that has been the norm really, where particularly since the growth of the internet, where a child's access is now so far outside of the home's control
Yeah.
that unless they are literate and they understand the way the world works, they are going into some very dark corners.
Yes. The screen problem,
Yeah.
as it were. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a like I said, I've been tracking it since starting this podcast and becoming really interested in it and really engaged with it. And the realization of how important parental reading and parental performance did. And I saw you had a performative reading article, which I thought
Yeah.
was really funny. And everyone's been talking about dudes on the subway performative reading, and I'm like, yeah, they need to be performative reading with children
Yeah.
at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
People, men need to performative read.
Yeah. The idea that they only do it to pick up women is like, no, no,
Yeah,
actually, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It- it's
Actually,
important.
yeah, it's important if they're picking up women and then having children and then
Yeah.
continuing to performatively read.
Yeah.
That's a huge victory.
Yeah.
And I think with all the options we have, like you said, the many and varied different things that we could all be doing, uh, men making it a point to read in front of their kids
Yeah.
is an essential thing. I think the other thing that we really need is we need a commitment to placing men in schools at the elementary level
Yeah.
as teachers,
Yeah.
which has disappeared
Yeah.
across the board. And that's both a pay thing
Yeah.
and it's also a environmental, the environment is not particularly desirable for a lot of men in contemporary society to become elementary school teachers.
Yeah.
And so the boys don't get that 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 demonstration
Yeah.
of what it means to, behave and be around uh, uh, intellect forward
Yeah.
and reading forward men.
Yeah. And we mentioned it at the start, really, where we said I think it's very easy to lose sight of what a big problem that is, because I think
Hmm.
when you're present in your son's life and all of your friends are present in their sons' lives, there is an ease to thinking, well, this is just the way everything is.
Yeah,
But actually, we know that increasingly male role models in the home are not as consistent as society has traditionally had them being.
Yeah.
So not having the access to a male role model in school. I mean, we have quite a number of schools where primary schools in particular are largely almost entirely female because, as you
Hmm.
say, you will often see slightly more male teachers in secondary schools, which is 11 up, but certainly in that first stage, it isn't something that is very common at all. So it can be that if you're not in a household which has a male reader within it, you might not actually come across one at any stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
For
apart from what you're seeing on your screen when you log on to podcasts and log on to things where you're like, I'd really rather they weren't watching that, really.
Yeah. Not to mention the dynamism. And this is one of the things that I worry about, particularly with the cancel culture conversations,
Yeah,
right? And the idea, the sort of premise or the rejection of rational critique
yeah,
of people, and the idea that argument is by necessity aggression.
yeah,
How do you create a space for boys to be interested in something unless it's fun, unless unless there's competition,
yeah,
unless there's argument, unless there's um there's something tied to it that's interesting. There are feuds and all those things. And there's this terrific YouTuber called Echo Chamberlain who talks about how uh, the fact that boys and the way boys write and the subjects boys write about are not what um, are not what the writing prize literati
yeah,
wants to hear, has made it so that we can't have that sort of fun element or that dynamic element. You know what I mean? That sort of like youthful dalliance with exploring chainsaw violence
yeah,
could eventually be, a later in life tragic novel about the Civil War and humanity and all those other things. But it doesn't get there unless you let the kid write about chainsaw violence and
yeah.
submit to the prize contest.
And I think that importance of low stakes enjoyment of literacy just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's treated as such a regiment. I mean, I don't know whether you have the same thing in the USA, but we have such a complex grammar curriculum here at the moment. I mean,
Hmm.
my 9-year-old comes home and he's got to practice his fronted adverbials, and it's like, look, I actually write books, and I have no concept of why you need to be sticking those in the front of your writing at 9, to be honest. But that sort of that deep that need to make it complex and heavy and something that you'll
Yeah.
be marked on and something that you'll be
How come
very
no one
carefully
how
assessed.
come told how come no one works on the sentence structure with Ian McEwan?
Well, exactly.
His page-long sentences. It is award-winning books.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
is, isn't it? The idea that there are very strict rules and you need to learn how to use these rules. We know that's everything the boys switch off from. There was
Yeah.
a really fascinating study that was done, I think it was in Chile, and they looked at the idea of why there was this gap in reading. And they took the same group and they did a test with them and to test their sort of literacy abilities. And the girls just hammered the boys out the park on it. And then they came back a little while later and they said, right, we're going to do a competition. And they did exactly the same thing. But with it being a competition and being fun, the boys outperformed the girls. So it's like
Hmm.
it isn't an intellectual situation. It's not a capacity. It's the framing of it. And as soon as you frame something in a in that sort of very confrontational test school based authoritarian driven way, boys switch off. And
Hmm.
as you say, we've got to find that way of getting those chainsaw stories to be able to be explored without it necessarily needing to be high stakes all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's um it's a long road to hoe.
Yeah,
Which is funny because it used to just be the norm, right? It used to just be the norm. Schools had high expectations. You were sent home with A Tale of Two Cities. As a sophomore in high school, you were expected to read it. You were expected to come back and comment on the nature of foreshadowing. You were expected to come back and have some understanding of why Dickens wrote the book. You were
Yeah.
expected to come back and be able to sort of describe the way in which the story developed over time. And that was how things were supposed to work. That was how um, schools managed themselves. And that was 20 years ago. Uh, there's no one who's going to convince me that the way they're doing it now is better if kids
Yeah.
come out the other side and they can't read
Yeah.
and they have no cultural they're not familiar with any cultural things, and the response is simply, oh, that's old white guy stuff,
Yeah.
which is become this excuse for not understanding basic
Anything.
tenets of
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
right? It's become an excuse for not understanding things. Um, you know what I mean? You know, like a a lot of knowledge of the history of South Africa because, of course, we read Cry the Beloved
Yeah.
Country
Yeah.
and The Power of One. That's not old white guy stuff. I read both of those books in high
Yeah.
schools. In high school, both of those tackle issues that contemporary socially engaged teachers are interested in talking
Yeah.
about, like race and governance. And it's just very strange to me that the standards haven't gotten higher
Yeah.
as the tools have gotten better.
That is extraordinary, isn't it? Because now every teenager has in their hand literally they've got access to the entire history of human knowledge in a
Yes.
way that is extraordinary. And yet, as you say, standards have got lower, and
Yes,
and and and,
somehow.
and actually, what they know about it has become so much smaller. And it is, there was some people were talking about the Odyssey and the fact that it seemed to be a story that was almost entirely unknown to a huge section of the audience that were going to see it. You're like, how can you be this confused about the Odyssey? It's a pretty fundamental story that I'm fairly sure the Simpsons have done it. Surely you must have a vague understanding it, but yeah, complete lack of awareness that it's an important story that you really should know, even if you haven't read it, you should be aware of it.
Yeah, fundamentally. I mean, the most recent is the movie Obsession.
Yes.
And everyone's like, "Oh, this idea of the granted wish," and it's like, guys, this the granted wish dates back to the monkey's paw,
Yeah.
and Aladdin.
Yeah.
The
It's not
the
as original as you're all
yeah,
suggesting.
and this is not a new concept,
Yeah.
guys. You know, so but that is funny. It's so strange. But I guess you're doing the metrics, and I'm just trying to convince dudes to read in front of their kids.
But I had to do a presentation at university, and there was a couple of visiting professors in, and the one from psychology put her hand up at one stage and stopped me in the middle of what I was saying, and she said, "But can I just ask, shouldn't they be doing something better than reading all this?" And this silence just descended over, and I was going to answer, and then my professor came in and went, I think I'll take that one. No, and he's like, that is exactly what was said about women reading, as you said, about 120,
Yeah,
150
it was
years ago. Women, they mustn't be allowed to read. And this notion that we're now in the position that boys mustn't be reading
yes.
books, they should be doing something. And then I said, should they not be outside or doing something
Mhm.
else? Like, well, it's not either or. But actually, if
Yeah,
boys want to read, then yes, I mean, I understand that people have concerns about things like Warhammer and the idea notion that is it too violent, and but
yeah.
actually I think reading is in itself such an important aspect of how you
Mhm.
understand things. It's much better to be reading and understanding how these quite complex ideas than it is to just pretend that we don't want them to do it anymore and to do something else. Be
If if
outside, as
if
you said.
if you're making it cool and masculine, then why is it a problem? You know what I mean? Like if the underlying idea is to create a framework where men see socially and philosophically the value in doing something, which you and I right here are talking about, we live with, then it's a good thing. It's just naturally going to be a good thing. I'm very excited for all the research you're doing, and I hope you'll come back and tell
Absolutely.
us about it. Do you want to plug any of your works?
I have my latest young adult work, which will be out with Rack Press, comes out I think either next week or the week after. That is the curse of Black Glass Island, which is a very sort of
Nice.
old-fashioned boys' adventure story. It's the second in a series, but that is very much written just for my son, really, because a lot of the stuff that I do write is aimed at adults. So I decided I wanted something that he could actually take into school and be proud of, rather than something where we had to block out all the swear words that appear in it. So yes, it is specifically written for him, but that's out with Rat Press in the next couple of weeks.
Well, that's terrific. Well, everybody should go out and visit Mallory's website, which will be in the show notes. And it's malloryauthor.com, which is very, very easy to reach. And thank you so much. And
No,
thank you for
thank
the
you. Really
work you're
enjoyed
doing.
talking.
This has been an episode of the Dadlit Pod. Wishing everyone a happy belated 4th of July and Canadian Independence Day. And did you guys have any holidays coming up?
No, no, we don't we probably should celebrate you guys going away, but we sort of we sort we the problem we've got here is it's about to be about a killer heat wave again that we had a couple of weeks ago and is about to hit us again. And I keep having to explain to friends in America, we don't do aircon here because it
Yes.
rains most of the time. So if the temperature gets up into the mid 30s, we all die. And we're about to have it. Literally, they closed the schools a couple of weeks ago because the schools couldn't cope with the heat. So it's we've got that to look forward to next week.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I'm having a
Our time together has come to an end. It's time to return to your wife, kids, and friends. It's time to pick up those books you forgot while you wait for the next Dad Lit Pod.